Our speaker this morning is Paul Blaney, our very own Paul Blaney. Paul grew up in an evangelical home, the son of a pastor. He did graduate work, his graduate work in clinical psychology at the University of Minnesota, then taught at the University of Texas at Austin, the University of Miami, and Emory and Henry College. He met Nancy, his wife, during his first year of teaching, and they are coming up on their 50th anniversary later this year. Congratulations. Throughout it all, Paul has usually had one foot in the world of music, and since retiring from Emory, the courses he has taught at the College for Older Adults have all been about some aspect of music history. His talk today is the second part of, if you didn't catch it, it's religion, question mark. Part one was on April 25th, if you want to go back to the website to listen to that. And today is part two. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Amy. As with my talk a month ago, today I'm trying to sort out a response to John Lennon's musical challenge for us to imagine there's no religion, the song that Jenna sang so beautifully for us a month ago. Europe has been drifting toward no religion for decades, and regarding the US, this statement appeared in the New York Times in an article just 2 weeks ago, and I quote, "Many churches are fragile, with attendance far below pre-pandemic levels. Denominations are shrinking, and so is the percentage of Americans who identify as Christian. 42% of Protestant pastors said they had seriously considered quitting full-time ministry within the past year." I considered reading that statement during our Joys and Concerns time, then calling for a vote as to whether or not it was a joy or a concern. Of course, how you vote might depend on what qualifies as religion. More about that at the end of the talk. A month ago, my topics included religion as tribalism, economic or political power, self-enhancement, source of structure, source of meaning. I ended that talk with the question, is it possible to be both religious and modern? I was making the point that religions often press us to believe things that are pretty incongruous. To reiterate the point today, I want to share a quip made by the brilliant cartoonist Jules Feiffer. Many of you may remember him. Here's his statement. "Christ died for our sins. Dare we make his martyrdom meaningless by not committing them?" A profound question, actually. It's obviously witty, but I'm not sharing it to make you laugh.
Okay.
I do not.
Hi.
I don't know if you remember me. I'm
I do,
Donna.
of course
Okay.
I do, yeah, sure.
Somebody has their speaker on. I guess it's off now. Okay. It's a profound question. It's obviously witty, but I'm not sharing it to make you laugh. I do not believe in mocking people's beliefs. I'm sharing it just to emphasize my point that it's hard to find meaning in a belief system that regularly defies reason, or it is for me anyway. So anyway, here's my list of topics to touch upon today. There are 9 of them. Religious as a coping resource, religion as a way of staying out of hell, religion as something for children, religion as a marketable commodity, religion as a solemnizer, religion as an intensifier, religion as entertainment, religion as nostalgia, and finally, as a source of morality. So first, religion as a coping resource, a source of solace, a source of strength. What comes to mind is Karl Marx's famous assertion that religion is the opiate of the people. Marx may have been a bit cynical, and he had some pretty unrealistic notions of forces in history, but he definitely was an acute observer of human behavior. But for a less cynical take on the matter, I'll share a personal story. When Nancy and I lived in Miami, She had a close friend and colleague whose husband was murdered brutally, leaving their 3 teenage children fatherless. The husband was a Baptist minister, and his wife, Nancy's friend, was also very devout. Nancy observed how important this woman's faith was in helping her through this horrific tragedy and in dealing with its wake. Nancy and I were, of course, glad for her, maybe even a little bit envious. But my response still is to say, I don't see that that kind of faith would work for me in a time of crisis. Maybe that's my problem. If it works for you, go for it. If you would feel better knowing I'm praying for you, I'll pray for you, whatever. Sometimes life is indeed hard, and I'm not one to scorn what religion offers some people as a way of dealing with it. That said, there's something a bit perverse about how some religious messaging emphasizes the wretchedness of human existence, as if to enhance the importance of religion as a source of relief. It's a bit like the law and order candidate who exaggerates the prevalence of violent crime to drum up support for his candidacy and his policies. Number 2, religion as a way of staying out of hell. Yes, that is one thing that people turn to religion for. But there's a problem here. If there were no religion in the first place, there would likely be no fear of hell, no reason to turn to religion to deal with that fear. About the best you can say about the notion of hell is that it's one hell of a marketing device. But I don't want to overstate my point here. Even people who have no exposure to religion and who have zero fear of health sometimes do fear death, and religion sometimes help deal with that too. A religion can be an attractive resource simply because it offers a vision of an appealing hereafter. Moving on, number 3. Religion as something for children. I have more to say about this one. A standard caricature of Catholicism involves the stern nun standing with a ruler over a child, usually a boy. There's a classic cartoon by John Callahan in this genre, in which the boy's punishment is to write over and over the following words: I am personally responsible for all of Christ's suffering. I thought of that as just a great joke, but in a New York Times column earlier this month, Gail Collins shared her personal recollection of being a student in a Catholic high school around 1960 and of, I quote, being marched into the auditorium for a lecture from a visiting cleric who assured us that when Jesus was dying on the cross, he was tortured by a vision of the sins of mankind, most notably adolescent girls making out with boys in the backseat of the car. So that's the version of religion for children that she was exposed to. A Protestant story that comes to mind is not as lurid, but it's from my own experience. When I was in my 20s, I was a church organist. One Sunday when the service had ended and the sanctuary had cleared, a 4-year-old boy who'd presumably been in Sunday school and had wandered off from his parents was watching me as I locked the organ and put the key underneath the seat. I told him that this was where I hid the key and that now he and I were the only 2 people who knew this secret. He looked at me somewhat sternly, which was a surprise. I was hoping to make him feel special, but his response was, no, there's someone else who knows too. I said, who? He said, Jesus. Jesus knows all our secrets. End of story, end of conversation, right? So there you have it. Religion as a way of enforcing children's behavior, good behavior through fear. There are, of course, plenty of mainstream American families in which the parents rarely darken the church door, but still take their kids to church for Sunday school or youth group or whatever. I never quite understood that. Maybe the parents just want their kids out of the house for a couple of hours. Maybe they have some vague sense that it's a positive influence. Maybe they feel that children are not really educated unless they know the stories of the prevailing religious tradition. Nancy and I certainly took our kids to Sunday school when we went to church, and we sent them to youth group when they were teens. Whether it succeeded in educating and acculturating them, I cannot say. Would our kids recognize the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalm, the Beatitudes? I suppose so, but I don't know. Maybe now that they're in their 40s, I'll quiz them. If they fail, I'll view it as an educational lapse, but roughly on a par with, say, not being able to recognize the difference between the music of Bach and the music of Beethoven. In other words, regrettable, but nothing horrendous in my view. But there's another aspect to children. People also use religion to help children deal with loss and death, encapsulated in the following statement. We're all so glad that Granddad has died because he's in a better place. He's with God. He's in heaven. We're sad that he died, but we're glad that he's in heaven. We don't have time to explore the pros and cons of this particular ploy and other ploys like it. Other than to say that just as I'm pretty sure that Nancy and I never told our kids that a scary God was snooping on them, we didn't tell them that anybody was or might not have been in heaven. Yes, there were times when our kids grieved deeply, but we found other ways of helping them deal with the loss. There's, of course, a key problem to dealing with children in a patronizing way when it comes to religion. It's exemplified by a story that a friend of mine told me about his 8-year-old brother. The brother announced at one point, "First, you admitted to me that the tooth fairy isn't real. Then you said that the Easter bunny wasn't real either. Then you confessed that even Santa Claus wasn't real. So when are you going to tell me about God? When are you going to admit that he's not either?" So what are parents supposed to say about that? And are they going to be credible? So before we move on, let's keep in mind that any and all of us may feel a lot like a child at various times in our adult lives. There are moments when we may crave simple childlike answers. We may take comfort in them. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Number 4, religion as part of the market economy. This is one I have a lot to say about too. First, an anecdote. In the summer of 2014, Nancy and I visited some dear friends in Ireland. I imagine Jerry's in Ireland now, by the way. This story he would find interesting, I bet. The husband went to Sunday, and the people were visiting. The husband went to Sunday Mass and came back amazed at something that had happened. The priest had begun the service by greeting everyone warmly, thanking them for being there. In a lifetime of attending Catholic churches in England, the US, and Ireland, our friend had never heard a priest do that before. The unspoken message had previously always been, "Of course you're here." But the church was losing a lot of status and power within the Irish culture, so the priest was acting in the way that Protestant pastors have in the US for a long time, as if he were, in fact, a friendly salesman, which meant the church is just another thing for sale within the service sector of the economy. When it comes to religion, it's generally a buyer's market these days. There are a lot of churches you can go to. All of them, most of them have a lot of empty seats, each of which has an unobstructed view. We're talking competition here. The Methodists in a given church are competing not merely with the devil, but also with the hardshell Methodists down the street and the progressive Methodists around the corner, not to mention all the other denominations. It's partly competition for the tithes and offerings needed to pay the salaries and utilities, to service the mortgage and so on, but it's not just that. Even a church with a huge endowment, and there are some places like that, a church with a huge endowment ceases to exist unless it has people. Even in the best of days, religion has a tendency to promise more than it can deliver. More joy, more commitment, contentment, whiter whites, whatever. Move over Madison Avenue. It's most evident in hymns and gospel songs, but the roots of oversell go way back. The 23rd Psalm is beautiful poetry. I'd be happy for it to be read at my funeral, but let's face it, it begins with an exaggerated promise. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Whew. I will not want, never want anything. Quite a grand claim. But the psalmist was maybe going for a placebo effect. I don't know. What great ad copy it is, though, or what a strange world we have in which a long string of absolutes and attributes are generally used in describing God. All knowing, all powerful, eternal, all loving, totally just, and so on and on. As I say, move over Madison Avenue. In the contemporary American scene, churches must adapt or die. Evangelical churches used to be noted for their rousing Sunday evening services, but these seem to have fallen to the competition. Competition from what? From what I can tell, it's not from other denominations. It's more likely from what? The National Football League, right? Church lost out. As I noted earlier, these are not fun days to be a pastor, especially if you hope to put food on the table for your family, whatever. Sometimes pastors are caught between market pressures and conscience. Pastors who let their consciences influence what they say will sooner or later offend someone whose pledge payments matter. It's no wonder that sometimes pastors play it safe and rely on bland content presented in an entertaining style. Sometimes they may try to cleverly sneak in a little jab that makes a controversial point, but only if they're very careful and very clever. There's of course something wrong with the picture in which a church has to mold itself to popular preferences in order to survive, but that's what you get. That's at least always a possibility when you have freedom of religion. Unfortunately, it encourages not only blandness, but tribalism. How? The best way to market yourself is by focusing on what makes you distinctive. It's called product differentiation. Here's an example. I had a friend in college named Judy. Judy is a girl that Gary knew as well. Like many students in that college, Judy grew up in a small evangelical church in a small town in New England, and she'd just come back from Easter break. I asked, "How was your break?" She looked at me and glumly and said, "On Easter Sunday morning, the pastor preached about how much better our church is because it does not have a fellowship hall with a kitchen. We're not like those other churches that are just really social clubs," and so on and on and on. So since celebration of the resurrection did not distinguish this church from the others, why even bother mentioning it on Easter Sunday? Talk about differentiation instead. So what about our church, UUCH? We're generally in the same competitive boat, and we definitely are at risk. But we have some advantages. First, no other nearby church is similar enough to us to be a real competitor. Product differentiation is not our problem, although we do still have a competitor. As far as I can tell, the competitor is mainly no church at all. Second, we have an unusually low maintenance physical facility on which there is no mortgage. We have no pastor salaries, and we do not rely on exaggerated promises. We do not, after all, promise but that by being a member of this church, you will experience full-time joy and commitment and contentment. None of these advantages guarantees survival, even our lack of a need for big pledges. None of that requires guarantees survival. But I think most of us would like our group not merely to survive, but to thrive. More to be said about that, but not now. Moving on to religion as solemnizing. First time I heard the verb solemnize was in a lecture about separation of church and state. The question was, can you have prayers in tax-funded contexts? The speaker's answer was, yes, but only if it's a solemnizing prayer, which he distinguished from a come to Jesus prayer. Okay. Prayers and religious talk can lend an air of importance and gravity to an event. We humans do like our ceremonies, don't we? Holding an event in a church is a way of solemnizing it as well as having a prayer. There are lots of families that engage with religion only at times of marriage, baptism, and death, and they do so because births, marriages, and deaths are the really big events in life, worthy of being solemnized. This can leave churches in a quandary, of course, if people turn to them only at such time. Who is going to pay the salaries and the building mortgage? But of course, people are finding alternative ways of solemnizing key events, even funerals. In fact, funeral homes are explicit in providing options for people who lack a church connection, at which point we're really back to the market economy, aren't we? Number 6, religion as an intensifier. What do I mean by an intensifier? Other words might be amplifier, supercharger, or accelerant. My own scholarly writing has been in the area of delusions, like persecutory delusions. So it turns out some persecutory delusions have religious overtones, like somebody believes that they're a special agent of God or whatever. What's interesting is that delusions with religious overtones are particularly rigid, fixed, less susceptible to change. Religion, as I say, seems to be an intensifier, in this case of persecutory delusions. Now, the interesting, as a sideline, some religions openly encourage persecutory thinking. The sayings attributed to Jesus, known as the Beatitudes, are mostly upbeat and beautiful, but there is one that is not. And I quote, "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake." It's almost as if Jesus were encouraging people to embrace victimhood. Not a good move, in my humble opinion. But it's not just delusions that religion can intensify. In our current landscape, what religion is obviously intensifying is political polarization. Religion can fuel hatred. It provides a language in which you can call your enemy evil. Calling God as claiming that God is on your side can be a wonderful path to self-inflation, self-righteousness, smugness. This relates to issues that I talked about a month ago, most notably tribalism. Number 7, religious as entertainment, another quick one. I'm told that if you are trying to build a megachurch from scratch, the most important early capital expenditure is a sound system. The most important early part-time hires are the musicians for the praise band. And the most, whether or not it's at St. Peter's in Rome or at Highlands Fellowship, services are a form of musical theater. Not that there's anything wrong with that. They are scripted. The music involves a rehearsed performance. Those who lead often dress the part, whether it's a robe embroidered with gilt thread or a cowboy outfit. It's musical theater. It's entertainment. People go to church to be entertained. Number 8, religion as nostalgia. This is what I have more to say about. This March, Bob Hill touched on this when he spoke of his grandmother's religion. A week or so after that, Harry Baya sang, "Will the circle be unbroken?" When I was a kid, the Sunday breakfast routine in our house involved listening to the old-fashioned revival hour being broadcast from Long Beach Auditorium in Long Beach, California. Anybody ever hear that program? That had a major following in this country back in those years. Despite its name, old-fashioned revival hour, the style was not so much old as rural, farm country, middle America, flyover country, camp meeting, whatever. For listeners around the country, around the nation in 1950s, Long Beach, California sounded very, very cool. So the old-fashioned revival hour was both nostalgic and cool at the same time. What a winning combination. Move over again, Madison Avenue. Not that there's anything wrong with nostalgia. When it comes to religion, people want their experience to be authentic, and deep roots in the past can be a mark of authenticity. But the question is, whose tradition, whose roots are the authentic roots? When Nancy and I were in Miami, there was a small group of traditional Catholics who were fanatically opposed to all Vatican II innovations. They would show up at Sunday masses to disrupt things by yelling out the words of the liturgy in Latin. I guess this was their version of the song, "Give Me That Old Time Religion." They were just shouting out in Latin, "Et cum spirito tuo," whatever. Whose tradition? Whose nostalgia? Finally, number 9 on my list of 9. Religion as a source of morality, a way of understanding values, ethics, good versus bad. I'll be quick on this one. Basically, I approve. Okay, this is the aspect of religion that I'm most comfortable with. In the case of Christianity, the golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself, etc. But we humans seem to have a great talent for viewing our allies as virtuous and our enemies as evil. Any system of morality worth embracing is one that reminds us of what is bad about me and my tribe and what is good about our adversaries. So often it seems like the other facets of religious behavior eclipse the moral one, which, as I say, I view as the most authentic. So it's time to wrap it up, maybe past time. At the beginning of my talk a month ago, I quoted Steven Weinberg, and these were his words as I shared them then. With or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil, but for good people to take evil, that takes religion, end quote. Weinberg was a world-class physicist, but then another world-class physicist, a man named Freeman Dyson, weighed in on this. This is what Dyson said. Weinberg's statement is true as far as it goes, but it's not the whole truth. To make it the whole truth, we must add an additional clause. And for bad people to do good things, that takes religion. So put it together and it reads as follows. With or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil, but for good people to do evil or for bad people to do good, that takes religion. I'll buy that, except that I would add a third clause, one that acknowledges that a lot of religious involvement doesn't push the needle in either direction. When he spoke to us in March, Richard Bryan began by recalling that when he was a young man going to a Presbyterian church, he couldn't see that religion made much of any difference in the lives of the other members. For religion to cause anyone to do good or evil requires engagement. People can belong to a particular religious group while failing to engage with its teachings. What comes to mind here is how little most Americans know about basic Christianity, and that includes Bible-thumping evangelicals. One wonders if it all amounts to just tribalism and musical theater in the end. But back to where I stand on these matters. I think I previously from this pulpit discussed my view of theocracy. And I'll repeat what I've said before, since it's a key to my views on religion more broadly. So what's my line about theocracy? The idea that God should be in charge, the government. When my friends complain about the religious right trying to turn our country into a theocracy, I install my tongue firmly in my cheek and respond, I have no problem with theocracy at all. Living in a world run by God would be wonderful, just as long as no people are involved. My point is, of course, that the problem with religion is that even if there is a God, and even if that God sometimes interferes in human affairs or intervenes in human affairs, religious activities are very, very, very human. They have the same drawbacks found in all other human activities and institutions. Religion does have positive aspects, no one of which is unique to religion. As with the little girl with the curl in the middle of her forehead, when religion is good, it can be very good indeed. But when it is bad, it can be horrid. I'd like to end by reciting the quotation with which Bill Chamberlain began last week's service. The words are from Bishop John Shelby Spong. The task of religion is not to turn us into proper believers. It is to deepen the personal within us, to embrace the power of life, to expand our consciousness, in order that we might see things that eyes do not normally see. To that, I say, Amen. And if that's the kind of religion that's in decline, I don't think it's a joy at all. I think it's a concern. Thank you.